Hi, I'm Becky, aka Defining Mum, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about my story, but also the work I've been doing to try and help others who are in the position that I once was. So I'm now a mum to three girls, all thanks to donor eggs. And I suppose my fertility journey first started back when I was 27. So my husband and I decided we wanted to start a family. Naively thought it would happen easily, which it didn't. And after about 6 months or so, I decided to try and get some help from the GP after my cycles were becoming very, very short, either between 12 to 20 days between each one. And after a lot of fighting to get the right test done, finally I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. And that meant that my egg reserve resembled that of somebody probably in their late 40s, early 50s. So yeah, it was a huge shock for us. And we were told that if we wanted to try and have a child that was genetically both ours, that we needed to go and have IVF straight away. And that's what we did. We went straight into an IVF cycle, which we self funded. Um, and the first cycle ended in a pregnancy, which I thought, brilliant, this has worked. But sadly, that ended in a miscarriage just around 8 weeks. And yeah, that was where I think it really started to hit me, the whole diagnosis and the situation that we were in. But we thought, well, it's worked the first time, let's try again. And we went through another 4 cycles of IVF in the space of under 12 months to try to get enough eggs to be able to bring us our child. And that didn't happen. We had a couple of negative cycles and we had a couple of cycles that didn't make it to transfer. And it was during that time that the concept of donor eggs was mentioned to us. Honestly, at first, it was something that I wasn't ready for. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for. My husband was adamantly not ready for it as well. And so we kept trying with my eggs. And I think after each cycle, I started to accept a little bit more that it was very unlikely to start happening with my eggs. I remember a consultant saying that there was a 5% chance of it happening with my eggs, but if we moved to donor eggs, it would give us probably around a 60% chance. And that is quite significant. And I suppose it was the odds coupled with my emotions, finances as well in the backs of our mind. Where we started to really think about it more seriously. I met a lady who had a child through donor eggs, which really helped me. And I started to really try and redefine what it meant to me to be a mum. And that's where the phrase defining mum comes from. I redefined what my original dream was. And I think we all have this original image in our minds when we grow up of a child that resembles us. And yeah, I'd always imagined that I would have my own little mini me, a vision of myself and my husband, and that's what I had to start to accept. And I started to then shift my thinking from what I would be losing in terms of a genetic connection, more towards what I would be gaining in everything that I would still be able to do in terms of carrying, giving birth, feeding them, nurturing them, growing them, loving them, and everything I do every single day now. Um, and so we made the decision to use donor eggs, and we chose to go to a clinic in the Czech Republic in Prague. And we were really, really lucky that it worked first time. We had 5 embryos as a result of the donor's eggs and my husband's sperm being mixed together. First embryo resulted in my now 4.5-year-old daughter Mila. And then we went back a year later to try for a sibling. And we were really lucky that we had 2 embryos put back and both took. So now we have almost 3-year-old twins, Eska and Lena. So I suppose I always find when I talk about my story like that, it sounds relatively straightforward. Obviously, not as straightforward as conceiving naturally. But one of the things that I really try and talk about in the work that I do is the overwhelming complexity of emotions that you can have to face when making this decision. And it's why I share what I do now, because I felt so alone when I was making that decision. Um, I felt like I was the only person in the world, and I just really needed to find someone else who understood. There were many fears that were racing around my head that only I understood. I felt unable to say out loud, even to my husband. And so I think for people to recognize that being told that you might be able to carry a child, but that child won't be genetically related to you, is a hugely complicated thing to process. And it's something that requires emotional support. And so, what I've tried to do is firstly share my story, and that's where I created Defining Mum just over 2 years ago now. And Defining Mum is my Instagram account and platform, and I also have a blog site as well where I share my story. I share snippets of our days together as a family just to show what life can be like. I share my reflections, things that I'm learning over time, how I'm talking to my girls about how they were conceived as well. And I also share a number of guest blogs. So it can range from people who have used donor sperm, double donor conceived people themselves, egg donors, and also other people who've used egg donation. And I think by sharing these stories, it not only helps us feel less alone, but it allows us to find validation in our own feelings and realize that we're not the only ones feeling that way. And back in September, so just over 3 months ago, I went a step further and created a platform specifically for donor conception support. So it's for whatever stage of the journey you are at, whether you're at the very beginning making the decision, whether you're going through treatment, whether you're pregnant after using donor conception, or parenting. It's a space where people can come together, share experiences, and talk to others who truly get it. So there's three parts to Path to Parenthood. The first section is the community. So I facilitate connections through a private app, which is away from social media, where people can really speak to those who are on that same journey. They can ask questions, they can share with each other. And through that app, I also hold virtual support groups as well. And that leads me into support. So we have our support groups. I also have a counsellor directory, which is specific to donor conception, and that's available for anyone who's a member to access and find someone who they can talk to professionally. And I also hold a number of webinars and live chats through the platform as well. So the webinars may focus on things such as grieving the loss of a dream and redefining a new dream. And I have expert guests who come and talk about these subjects. And you as a member can also ask questions. We've also covered talking to your child about donor conception. How might my child feel? Epigenetics, which is a fascinating topic all about how you as a mum can really influence that child as you grow them and as you then nurture them through their childhood. And also within the information section, we have lots of personal stories. So I share live chats with people, people who've been through egg donation, sperm donation. I've also interviewed some men, so husbands of people who've been through egg donation, to get the male perspective as well, which is so rarely talked about. And so there's so much information there for people to gather and to learn from and to hopefully find comfort in, and just that help in making what are some very, very difficult decisions. And so, final piece of kind of advice from me, really, what I've learned and what I would say to anyone who's still trying to conceive and may need to consider donor conception in the future. The first one would be to allow yourself time to grieve. Recognize that this is a loss. And although it's not a tangible, visible loss, it's something that you may feel deep down, and the grieving doesn't necessarily end at the point you have your baby. There's still things that sometimes trigger me at times, but the joy and the love that I have from the girls far, far outweighs any of that. I'd also say if you're really struggling, try and get some support through a professional counsellor. Just having that space to talk about these things and to really share your feelings is invaluable and can really, really help you to process those emotions. Find others who are going through it. So, whether it be through my Defining Mum Instagram page, I can facilitate connections, or whether it be through Path to Parent Hub, there are spaces there where you can find people who are in the same position as you, and you really aren't on your own. educate yourself. So there are lots of different things that come up along the way when it comes to donor conception. It's not a one-time decision. It's something that will inevitably, hopefully, be the end of your infertility story, but it is the start of your child's story. And so there's lots of things to think about when you're making these decisions. And finally, hopefully this will give you some comfort, but for myself and for many, many people who I've spoken to who are now parents, what I've found is that many, many of the fears I had around not bonding, how will my child feel, how will I feel, have become really things that don't need to be worried about. They are things that are totally unfounded. And I think when everything is so unknown, it's really easy to worry about everything in the future. Um, Even when it comes to the decision of which donor to choose. But I think once that child is in your arms, you realize the impact that you can have and the love that you have for them. I think about my girls now, and there is absolutely no way I would change our story. I wouldn't change them for the world. I couldn't love them anymore. And so hopefully I can give you some comfort in that as our reality now. Um, and if anyone ever has any questions that they want to ask me, I'm really open. I'm an open book. You can contact me through Instagram or through my blog site, and I'll happily chat with you. I hope there's been lots of useful information there. You can find me at Defining Mum on Instagram or at www.definingmum.com.